Well, in previous topic we discussed about zone, what zone is and how to configure zone on Palo Alto firewall, right? Like we configured few of the zones, like we configured outside zone, we configured inside zone and few DMZ zone like web zone and SQL zone. So what we did after configuring the zone, we assign an interfaces to that particular zone so that the policy can be defined. So if the traffic is coming from that particular interface or from that zone going to some other zone, for example, the traffic is coming from inside zone and going to outside zone for internet access, so that we can use the policy to restrict the traffic or take an action depend upon the traffic we want to send on internet. So that is some kind of control we can do by utilizing the zone. But after creating this zone, our job is still not going to finish, because let's say there is an attacker in here, right? Now this attacker would like to know if any port is open on this firewall or if any server behind this firewall is vulnerable, right? So how he gonna know if any server or port is like he can take advantage of? So what they do basically, let's say there is one IP in here, for example 1.2.3.4. this is the public IP address. Maybe this IP is NATed behind one of the server to the web server, right? So what this attacker is going to do basically, he's going to scan this public IP address for as many port he can. Maybe he's going to scan the port based upon TCP protocol or going to scan port upon UDP protocol, so that he would gonna know if any port is open or if any port is mapped or NAT with this one of the web server, and that server is NATed with one of that TCP or UDP port. So he wants to know what he can take advantage from these ports he can. Now the question is, how this attacker is going to know which are the ports open on this public IP address? Well, the only way to know if any ports are vulnerable or open, he's going to do the port scan. And the port he's going to scan is not going to scan like one IP address with one port, something like that. He's just going to send like thousands and thousands of traffic just to identify which are the ports open, and at the same time he will start his attacking activity at the same time. So that is something become very challenges to stop such kind of activity on the zone. So let's consider we want to restrict such kind of activity or port scan coming from this particular attacker. So we want to secure this zone so that if such kind of activity is going to happen, this zone should not be get attacked by such attacker. So that is something we can control by using zone protection. So in today's topic, what we're going to do basically, we're going to learn about what zone protection is and how we can enable zone protection to particular interface. Maybe it belong to inside zone or outside zone. So let's get started. Well, before we creating the zone protection profile, first we need to decide which zone we're going to select that profile for. For example, we have three zones in here, which is inside zone, outside zone, and one of the web server zone might be in DMZ, right? Now let's say we want to enable zone protection profile for this one of the outside zone. So all we need to do is we need to select this outside zone, and there is an option called zone protection profile. So if any protection profile is already available, then we're going to see that in here. But if it is not there, then we can create zone protection profile from here. So in order to create the profile, all we need to do is we need to just select zone protection profile, and it is going to show these are the options we need to configure based upon our requirement of the firewall, right? This is the one way you can enable zone or create the profile for the zone. Now let's go like find another way to create this zone protection profile. So let's cancel this, and in order to access the different option, all we need to do is we need to go into the network option, and if you scroll in here, there is a network profiles option, and under there is a zone protection. So whatever zone protection profile we will create, that is all going to show in here. So let's go and define one of the zone protection profile for outside zone, right? So we need to click on add, and it's going to show the same option what we saw earlier. Now it is not as that simple it look like. For example, let's say we selected all these option, let's say this all option, any option we seen in the tab, and we just press OK and apply policy to the outside interface. Now the problem is it is not that simple it look like, because these are the all default setting been enabled by the Palo Alto, and if we rely upon this default setting, there are the chances the zone protection profile is might gonna work or it's not gonna work for you, and there might be the chances you might bring down your production traffic. So this is really important to understand your production traffic, like how your production traffic works, then only you should be configuring this zone protection profile. Otherwise this zone protection profile is not going to work properly. So first we need to understand what these options are and how these options work, then only you should be selecting which are the options basically going to work for your environment. Otherwise you should not be selecting any of this option, or you might have some outages in your network. So let's start discussing about these options one by one. Now let's go ahead and configure the zone protection profile. So as we decided we're going to configure this for outside interface, now let's give some name, for example outside zone protection, for example. Now we can go ahead and configure these options one by one. So first option is, which is flood protection. So in flood protection is going to verify the sync, UDP, ICMP, ICMPv6 and other IP. So let's first discuss about the sync. So after selecting this sync, it's going to ask you what you want to do with this kind of traffic, whether you would like to enable random early drop or you like to select as an sync cookies. So first we need to understand what is the difference between this random early drop and sync cookies. So let's discuss about the random early drop first. Let's say we have this firewall in here, and there is behind the production traffic and it is connected to internet. This is our outside zone and this is inside zone, and there is an attacker, right? And if this attacker is going to send traffic or going to scan your outside zone, this random early drop, also known as red, what is gonna do is going to match its profile based upon the connection per second. So this all the profile has the same kind of matching criteria, which is connection per second. If that connection per second is going to be exceed, then the traffic is going to drop as soon as it matches that particular number. So that is something red is going to do. Red is going to drop the traffic right away. Now let's discuss about the sync cookies. So if you select the sync cookies, then what sync cookie is going to do, let's say there is a firewall, for example, and there is production traffic and there is one PC in here and it is also connected to internet, for example. So this firewall basically going to act as a proxy, right? So what it's gonna do, it's going to monitor the traffic which is coming from the outside. If the traffic is going to come inside, it is going to first send the sync, right? As per the TCP handshake, it's going to send you the sync. Now this proxy firewall, what's gonna do, if this traffic is going to be for one of these hosts, this firewall is not going to send traffic directly to this particular host. What it's gonna do, it's going to act behalf of this host. So it's going to send this sync ACK packet to that source. If the ACK is not going to come back, then this firewall is going to drop the traffic. So it is not going to just drop the traffic right away based upon what we saw in red, right? So sync cookies is very better option as per the Palo Alto, but there are some limitation and problem with both of these options. Now let's start to understand what are the problem with these both options. Now let's say we have two tables in here, for example for the sync cookies, right, and another is for the red. Now what are the advantage and disadvantage with this option, so that only you should be enabling which is the option is going to work for you. So as per the sync cookies, we saw it is only going to match with the sync traffic and it's going to send back the sync ACK. If the ACK is not coming back, then only is going to drop the traffic, unlike this red option. And this is the better option, right? It is not going to drop any option, but the problem is this is like CPU and memory, or you can also call the resource intensive. so it is going to consume so much resources of Palo Alto firewall. So enabling this option might gonna help you, but at the same time you need to also consider your resources on your Palo Alto firewall, because it's going to consume so much of these resources. Now in case of RAID, it is not going to be that problem, but the problem in here is it is going to drop the packet right away. Now the another problem with sync cookie is it is only going to be work if you have DDoS configuration just before of your firewall. For example, you have the firewall, and before firewall you should be having one of the device called DDoS, is going to prevent you from the DDoS attack, and it is connected to internet. If you do not have this DDoS, then you should always be selecting the RAID or random early drop. So this is the difference between selecting these two options, right? So sync cookies might going to help you as per the simple configuration wise, but it is going to be resource intensive, as well as if you do not have DDoS, then you should not be selecting this option. So in that particular case, you should be selecting the RAID. Now let's assume we do not have DDoS device, so we want to select the RAID. Okay, so let's go in here and select the random early drop. Now in here we see the option which is alarm rate, activate, and maximum, and these are all in connection per second as we saw, and these are all the default number. Now the problem here is these are the number defined by the Palo Alto, and these are the default setting, right? But how is it going to work for you? Because every production has the different traffic coming in, right? So your office might have been having the traffic coming like 20,000, or it can be less than 5,000. It's totally depend upon the environment what you have, right? So the question would be, how are you going to know how much connection per second your firewall is receiving, right? Then only you should be enabling this option. Otherwise what might happen, let's say your firewall is receiving 20,000 connection per second as per the production normal behavior, and you going to define this default setting, then your production traffic is going to be impacted by this default setting. So first you need to understand the connection per second, the traffic hitting on your firewall, then only you should be selecting which are the number you're going to define in here. Now the another question would be, how are you going to know like how much connection per second is coming to your firewall, right? So let's go and find out how we can understand how much connection per second is hitting on your firewall. So let's do an OK in here, and we can come back in here later. So in order to understand how much connection per second is hitting on your firewall, if you have the panorama, in the panorama there is a option called device in health, and you can see there is a under health you can see that connection per second as per the device. But if you do not have the panorama, you have single device, then what you can do is you can go into search into Google. Let's go in Google and type like Palo Alto Chrome extension, and in there is going to tell you like pan w Chrome, right? And once you select that, you need to add this extension in your Chrome. So let's say this Chrome extension is enabled. Now let's go in extension area, and we see there is a pan Chrome extension in here. So first what we're gonna do, we need to log out from this firewall, and once we log in back, it is going to enable Chrome extension. So let me add the password. Now you can see in here it wants to add this Palo Alto firewall under this pan w Chrome. So let's say OK. So after you do OK, you need to see like how much connection is hitting. So let's open one more tab and access this extension, Palo Alto extension. Now you can see my IP address in here, right? So all I have to do is I have to select this IP address, and you can going to see all the statistics of your firewall in here. Now in there, there's an option called settings. These three lines, you have to click on there and go to sessions. So in sessions, you're going to see all these area in here, which is connection per second. You're going to see. So if your connection per second here might be 10,000, 20,000, or depend upon your traffic level is, you need to understand that your connection per second is based upon your firewall is seeing, and then only you should be adding the number. Since we do not have any traffic, that's why we do not see any number in here. But let me pull one of the data. So this is the data I pulled from one of the Palo Alto documentation, and you can see in here they have defined this connection per second area, and this particular traffic is seeing about 400 connection per second, and this can be very depend upon the traffic your firewall is seeing, right? So based upon that, we are going to make the connection per second setting. So let's go and do the setting on Palo Alto firewall. Since we are able to understand about the connection per second on Palo Alto firewall, now let's assume this particular firewall is seeing the traffic. Let's say it is seeing the traffic up to like 20,000 connection per second. So let's give some number. So this is like 20,000 connection per second, and this is basically this traffic is during the normal production traffic. For example, when my normal production traffic is working fine in the office, and this is the maximum rate I'm seeing on the firewall as a 20,000 connection per second. So when you are going to make some changes under the zone protection profile, you need to make sure what is the maximum connection per second your firewall is seeing during the normal production traffic. Then only we should be going on the firewall to make changes under the zone protection profile. Since we have considered this is our 20k, this is during the normal situation, so let's give some name. This is my normal traffic, right? And this is connection per second 20,000. Since we got this number about our normal traffic connection per second, now we can go on firewall and make the changes. So before calculating this traffic, let me show you one thing. So let's go to our firewall under zone protection profile, and you can see under the action there is a RED, which is random early drop. We are going to do as per the traffic monitoring and take action, and there is like setting we need to make in here, which is alarm rate, activate, and maximum. So these are the setting it is going to monitor under connection per second. So this is the setting we're going to make in here. So our connection per second is 20,000, right? So let's go in here on firewall. So let's understand here first. So this is our normal traffic, which is 20,000 connection per second. Now as per the Palo Alto, what we need to do is we need to set the alarm threshold. So alarm threshold has to be 15 to 20% from your normal traffic behavior. So if we calculate like 20% of 20,000 connection per second, let's identify how much we're gonna get. So let's go to calc. So let's add in here, which is 20,000 divided by 100 multiplied by 20, and the number we are getting 4,000. So this is going to be add number 4,000, right? So what we're gonna do, basically we're going to add or set the threshold for an alarm, which is going to be 24,000 connection per second. So what is going to happen, basically once this firewall has reached 24,000 connection per second, it is going to generate an alarm, and that is something we're gonna know that the firewall is seeing more connection than the usual or normal behavior. Now this is only going to be an alarm, it is not going to take any action, right? So to take an action, what we need to do is we need to also make the setting under the activate. So the activation profile also has the number, so that is going to be just about 24,000. Let's make sure it is going to be like 25,000. So once it is going to hit 25,000 connection per second, it is going to be activate, right? And once it is activate, it is going to drop the packet. We need to understand when the traffic is going to be activated, it is not going to drop all these 25,000 connection. It is going to drop whatever the new individual connection is coming above 25,000. For example, if we have 25,000 connection where the traffic is getting activated for drop, and when +1 packet is coming or session is coming, that only one individual connection is going to drop, right? So that is something going to be activate as a drop connection. But let's say if the traffic is coming like way beyond it is expected behavior, for example, there's like multiple attacker is trying to attack your firewall, and this connection is going to be like, for example, 100k connection per second, then what is going to be happening in that case, you need to set the maximum connection per second. So there is also setting in the firewall what we saw maximum. So as per the Palo Alto, what we need to do is we need to set the 80 to 90% of your normal average traffic, so that if the connection are hitting like 80 to 90%, for example this is our 80 to 90% traffic is going to hit from our normal behavior, then all the traffic is going to be blocked. Now what firewall is saying here, it sees as my normal traffic behavior was 20,000 connection per second, but what I'm seeing right now, it is like increase into 90% from my normal behavior. So if the firewall is getting traffic hit up to 100k, then as per the rule what we're gonna set, which is if the firewall is going to see 90% above its normal traffic behavior, it should be taking an action which is maximum traffic hit. So what we're gonna do, basically we also going to set the maximum connection per second hit on the firewall, so that what is going to happen, it is going to calculate 90% of these 20,000 connection per second. So let's say if we calculate, it might gonna come somewhere about 39,000 connection per second, for example. This is just a random kind of calculation. So what will happen, basically once firewall is going to see this is 39,000 connection per second, the hit is coming on the firewall, what is going to do, basically it's going to drop all the packet coming to the firewall. The reason only firewall is going to block all this incoming connection, because the normal traffic behavior was 20,000 connection per second, but now the traffic has reached its beyond 90%. That means firewall believes that there might be some kind of attack is happening, because now the connection per second has reached 90%, which is way beyond its expected behavior, and there it is going to activate its maximum connection per second. So we understood about the alarm, how alarm works, how activate profile work, and how maximum profile work, right? Now let's go to firewall and activate all these settings one by one. Since we have understood our normal traffic behavior, which is 20,000 connection per second, so what we're gonna do, basically we're going to consider this as a normal traffic behavior and gonna set the setting in here. So our alarm rate is basically going to be 20% of the normal traffic behavior, which is 20,000 connection per second. So if we calculate 20% of 20,000 as we saw, then it is going to be 24,000 connection per second for alarm rate. Once it is going to reach this point, it is going to generate an alarm, and then we need to set the activate in here. So this is something going to be just above the alarm rate, so let's say 25,000 connection per second. Once it is going to hit, it is going to start drop the connection, which is going to hit about 25,000 connection per second. Now there is like maximum connection per second, so let's consider this is something going to be 39,000 connection per second. So once it is going to reach this level, it is going to drop all the packet, because firewall believes that there might be some unexpected behavior or the traffic is coming which might be related to attack. So that is this one setting we can do in the sync. Now once it is done, now let's move on to the UDP. So let's consider UDP is like going to be the same behavior and it's coming under the same connection per second. So let's make the changes for 24,000 connection per second for alarm rate, and 25,000 for activate rate, and 39,000 for its maximum rate. So it is going to be same. Now the next is ICMP version 6 and other IP. So let's go to our firewall where all the sessions are coming. So if you go on your firewall under this Chrome extension in sessions, you can also see the current active session. Since this is like demo firewall, that's the reason we do not see any number in here, but you can also monitor some sessions in here like TCP, UDP, ICMP, this kind of session. But the problem is like you need to be very careful. You need to monitor this during your maximum peak behavior. So once you reach saw this is like one of the 3 p.m. your local time is going to be maximum peak where you monitor 24,000 connection per second. So if you have the panorama, you need to make sure like what was the rate for this UDP or ICMP, this kind of traffic, and that setting you can make under the firewall. You can also contact to Palo Alto support just to understand what is my maximum UDP session or ICMP session on the firewall. So that would be my suggestion, to contact Palo Alto support to understand what is the maximum connection per second you are seeing for UDP traffic, or maybe ICMP traffic, maybe ICMP version 6. So they can guide you with the right number, so that you're not going to make any mistake or miscalculation by just monitoring this particular session count, right? So that would be my suggestion. Since this is just for our understanding, so let's assume we are seeing ICMP about 100 connection per second during like our normal traffic peak, and same is going to be for ICMP version 6. So let's make these settings under the ICMP. So we'll go to ICMP and we are going to make the changes. For example, my ICMP is going to be 100 connection per second for alarm rate, and it's going to be 120 for activate rate, and it's going to be 190 for my maximum. So if it is something is going to happen, it should be taking the action as per the connection per second rate. And it will be similar for ICMP version 6. For example, let's make it 100, 120 and 190, right? So other IP, I guess it will be better if you contact Palo Alto support to understand what are the changes you should be making in order to make other IP, because these are the 4 changes we know like we should be making on the Palo Alto firewall. Now again, I would recommend you to contact Palo Alto support just to understand your connection per second, because any kind of mistake might going to disrupt your production traffic, right? Now let's move on to our next section, which is reconnaissance protection. This is really important, and what you can do is you can use the normal traffic count what has been set by the Palo Alto, and we have set this and we do not see any issue. So let's understand what is the use of this reconnaissance protection. So what happened basically in reconnaissance, if someone is trying to scan your firewall to see if any port is open, that is come under the reconnaissance. For example, you might have this firewall in here, right, and it is connected to internet, and there is an attacker who is trying to scan the public IP address on this firewall. So what is going to happen, it is going to calculate this threshold. If it is something the threshold is going beyond for this TCP port scan, maybe UDP port scan or host sweep scan, then it is going to take an action. So this is something applies also when you are doing the pen testing. For example, you have the security team, they wants to know if any server behind this firewall, for example this is DMZ, and we open the port in the DMZ, right? For example, this is one of the server is NATed with the public IP address, right? So we open port, for example 443 or maybe some different port, but let's say by mistake the port 22 is open, right? So what our security team do, they do some kind of pen testing, right? So they scan this public IP address just to understand if any port is open, which is might going to be issue for your enterprise network. So they try to understand which are the port are vulnerable or open, so they do the pen testing. But if you enable this setting, then even this security guy which is going to do legit scan, they are not able to scan your firewall. So what you're gonna do is basically you're gonna add or whitelist those IP addresses on this firewall. So once whitelist is done, now this security guy which is belong to your own enterprise network, he is going to scan the public IP address on this firewall and try to understand if any port is open which is going to be vulnerable or might be having some issue. For example, he might able to understand this port 22 is open, which is not good as per the security reason, and he will come to you and say, okay, we need to shut this port, or we need to open this port for specific public IP address. It should not be open to any public IP address. So those kind of result they might come up with after doing the pen testing on this Palo Alto firewall. But we don't want these hackers, let's name it hacker, should be doing any kind of pen testing or maybe scanning on your firewall, right? So we are going to deny these kind of people should not scan your firewall, but we want to allow this your own security people should be able to scan your firewall. So we are going to allow them in here, and we are going to disallow everyone from the scanning. So let's make the changes. So in order to make changes, it is quite going to be very simple. All we need to do is we need to just click on enable. So let's understand these are the options first. So what is going to happen basically, when the person is going to run scan upon the TCP port scan, that is come under the TCP scan, the same is apply for the UDP port scan, and this is host sweep. So what is happened basically in host sweep, for example, there is a firewall and there is a DMZ server, for example, right? And this DMZ server has the public IP address on the internet and has been NAT with one of the public IP address, right? So what this attacker basically do, sometimes they do scan based upon this specific public IP address, for example 1.2.3.4, and he tried to identify if any vulnerability or the port is open this particular IP address. Or what he does basically, he scan the range of IP addresses, for example /24, whichever going to be 1.2.3.4, right? /24 is going to scan, so that is come under the host sweeping, so that he just try to understand if any of the public IP address under this particular subnet has any vulnerability or port open, that comes under this host sweep. So we are not going to allow even the host sweep kind of scan as well, right? So these are the settings we need to enable in firewall. So all we need to do is we need to enable all these settings and just press OK. Now let's assume we want to allow one of our security guy who can run the scan in here. So what we need to do is we need to add the public IP address. So let's give it name security pen testing. Okay, that would be the profile, and the IP is going to be, for example 1.2.10.10. for example, this is our public IP address /32 because this is only host, and just press OK. So as we can see here, it says like source address exclusion, which is when the traffic is coming from this particular source, it is not going to consider as an attack, but it is going to just whitelist this public IP address so that he can make the scan on the firewall just to understand the port open or any kind of vulnerabilities exist. Now let's move to our next section, which is packet based attack. Now in packet based attack, we are going to have multiple options, which is IP drop, TCP drop, ICMP drop, then IPv6 drop, and ICMPv6 drop. So basically we are not going to enable all these options, but we need to understand what these options are and in what scenario this option we should be enabling, right? So let's get started. So first let's try to understand the IP drop option under the packet based attack. So our first option under IP drop option is spoof IP address. So first we need to understand what spoof IP address is, right? So let's say there is a firewall in here, okay, and it is connected to internet, and this is our local area network where the PCs are sitting. So let's consider this is one of the IP address 192.168 and 10.10, and this is something 10.11 in the same range, right? Now there is an attacker sitting here and his IP address is 1.2.20.30. So what attacker he does basically, he sends the traffic to the public IP address like 1.2.3.4, and let's say this public IP address is NATed with one of the server which is having IP address which is 192.168.20.10, right? Now what this attacker do basically, this attacker is going to send the traffic to this 1.2.3.4. so it's going to include the spoof IP address if he wants to do the spoofing, right? So his source is going to be your internal inside kind of, you know, one of the legit IP address. For example, it is going to be 192.168.10.10 like this machine in here, and destination is going to be your DMZ NATed IP address, which is 192.168.20.10. So when the packet is going to come, it's going to hit public IP address and it's going to route to your DMZ server. But when DMZ server is going to receive the packet, it says, okay, this IP actually belong to my own kind of local area network. So it's going to redirect the IP address in your trusted zone. This is also come under some kind of DDoS attack. So basically this kind of attack is done by the IP spoofing. They just want to spoof your IP address, want to just send the traffic to all your internal network so that they can make the traffic busy on your firewall, so your firewall get more busy, and at some point the resources is going to be utilized on your firewall, and at one time your firewall might gonna get rebooted or gonna go down, right? So these are like spoofing or the DDoS attack they might try to perform. So in here what we do basically, by selecting this IP spoofing option, it is not going to allow such kind of behavior. So what the firewall is going to check, when the traffic is coming from outside, it's supposed to go outside, it's not supposed to go the inside, because someone is trying to do this IP spoofing by redirecting traffic to the different zone. So source has to be same interface or zone the traffic is come from, right? So that is something happen in the IP spoofing. It has to be the same source interface or zone. So let's check in here. And one more thing we need to notice, that the spoof IP address, it is basically we enable on inside zone. For example, if you have this firewall and there is like inside zone and this is like outside zone, so the firewall need to check the traffic is coming from inside, has to go inside back. It should not be the redirect to the outside some kind of thing. So this is the area Palo Alto suggests you should be enabling the spoof IP address for the inside zone, because this is the interface or zone mostly attackers target. So this is like a spoof IP address kind of understanding, as well as on what interface or zone you should be enabling this profile. Now let's move on to next, which is strict IP address check. So strict IP address check is going to be the similar. For example, we have firewall in here, this is one of our inside zone and this is outside zone, right? So it is going to match two condition in here. First, it is going to check the broadcast IP address. For example, we have network in here which is 192.168.10.xs. so this is our going to be one of the broadcast network. So what firewall is basically going to do, when the traffic is coming from one of the host IP address, for example 10.100, one of the host in here, and he's going to send the traffic to the outside, then your source is going to be 10.100, right? So when the traffic is going to reverse back, it has to be the same subnet. It cannot be the different subnet. It cannot be the subnet which is 20 dot something, right? So the first condition is your source subnet has to be the same broadcast, right, where the traffic is came from. So inside interface should be having the same broadcast domain kind of IP subnet. So that is the one condition is going to match. Then second is going to match, it has to be the same source interface. So if the traffic is hitting on 1/1 interface in the inside, then it has to be reverse direction, has to be 1/1 only. So these are the two conditions going to be matched in the strict IP address check, so that attacker cannot do any kind of spoofing or is going to redirect traffic to the different zone. Now the next option is fragmented traffic. So what happens in fragmented traffic, for example, we have firewall in here, and if it is connected to internet, there might be attacker would try to send the jumbo packet or jumbo frame to the firewall just to make busy your firewall or eat your resources. So what happened, this firewall monitored this kind of session, and it says if the jumbo frame is basically divided into multiple fragment, this kind of traffic it should be dropped. But you should be enabling it very carefully, because what might happen, you might also have one of your DMZ server, right, and this DMZ server might also send the jumbo frame to your own internal network. So you need to make sure on which interface you are going to apply this policy for, whether you are going to apply for the outside zone, whether you're going to apply for the inside zone, right? But if it is like inside zone, this might, you need to deselect. There might be the chances you might sending the jumbo frame for your internal network, and you might be, you know, causing like production disruption. But if it is like outside zone, you can enable, but you should be monitoring if it is like still affecting your production network or not. If this option is affecting, then you need to deselect and contact the Palo support just to understand why it might be happening, so that whether you should be enabling or disabling this fragmented traffic. Now the next option is strict source routing. So in strict source routing, what happen if you have like in ISP network, there might be having like hundreds and hundreds of routers. So for example, the other routers, right? So what happened in source routing, this is like all connected routers, right? So if they are like connected like with each other, they choose their own path. But for example, if there is an attacker in sitting there and it is trying to do some kind of, you know, source routing kind of attack, then the expected behavior was, you know, traffic was supposed to go from here to your particular destination, but attacker wants to route this traffic not from there, but it wants to route traffic from different path by sending by, you know, kind of source routing kind of spoofing attack, something like that. So this kind of attack can be stopped by using this source routing. Now the other option what we see here, which is loose source routing, timestamp and record route, these are the option basically I see as an optional. You need to contact Palo Alto support. This might not going to be, you know, in your case, but if you want to enable, you can. But this is something I guess you might not need it, but you can just enable them all and see if it is going to disrupt your production traffic. If it is not, let it be enabled, but if it is, just deselect it and work with Palo Alto support to understand if this option you should be enabling in your office environment or not. Now let's move to different option, which is TCP drop. Now in TCP drop, we see here which is mismatch overlapping TCP segment. This is basically happen when attacker would like to attack you as a man in the middle, right? So what happened basically in mismatch overlapping TCP segment, let's say there is a firewall and there is one user sitting inside your network. This is one of the PC of the user and it's connected to internet, and let's say there is one banking website, right? Let's consider this is one of the bank, and this user would like to send traffic to the bank. So traffic goes like this, but let's assume for some reason now attacker is sitting in your own office and kind of capturing this particular session or this traffic. So what this attacker is gonna do basically, he's going to do as a man in the, you know, middle attack, MITM. So what this attacker basically gonna do, he's going to say, okay, the traffic is going from this particular source to banking website, but when it is going to return back, it's supposed to come back to me. So what he gonna do basically, he gonna make some changes into the TCP segment. So the firewall sees if particular TCP segment is going, and if someone is trying to, you know, put its own TCP segment, then it is going to understand, okay, this particular session has been manipulated and it should be dropped. So this is something going to be dropped in mismatch overlapping TCP segment. Now the next one is split handshake. So what happened in basically split handshake, let's say there is a firewall, all right, and there is a traffic is supposed to be in TCP segment. It has to be three-way handshake. So let's say this is three-way handshake. So what happened in three-way handshake, for example, there is one of the users sitting in here. When this user send the traffic to firewall, so the first action is going to be sync, right? So it's going to be sync. Once the firewall receives this particular sync, it sends back, which is sync ACK, okay? And once ACK is received by this particular user, it sends back the acknowledge or ACK. So this is something we known as a normal three-way handshake. So this has to be done in TCP, the first time communication. But let's say this is something going to be manipulated by the one of the attacker, and it's going to be like 4-way or 5-way handshake, then that is something going to be dropped by this Palo Alto firewall. So what firewall believes, it has to be 3-way handshake. It could not be more than like 3, like 4 or 5-way handshake, because that could be some kind of attack what firewall believes, right? So such kind of attack we can stop by using split handshake. Now the next one is TCP sync data and TCP sync ACK with data. So these are the options basically by default enabled on Palo Alto firewall, and you should not be disabling, because what happened in 3-way handshake, it has to be like initial packet which is mostly going to be hello packet. For example, if we have firewall in here, and if firewall is making 3-way handshake with one of this user, first is going to be hello packet, which is also known as kind of sync, right? And when firewall send back, he might also going to say okay hello, like you are saying sync and acknowledge, right? And then this user is going to send back acknowledge. So this is similar to when you meet someone, you do not share your information directly, right? You first have your own introduction, then only you start sharing some information about your maybe hobbies, where you work, something like that. So this is kind of handshake also happen into networking. It's supposed to be hello, like sync, ACK and ACK, kind of 3-way handshake in TCP segment, but it should not contain any kind of data. If it contains data in your initial conversation, that is some kind of attack. So that is set on Palo Alto firewall, which is TCP sync with data. If it is coming, it has to drop, and if it is coming like TCP sync ACK with data, it is also has to drop. So if this hello packet or sync has data, which is going to be dropped. If it has a sync ACK with also data, it is also supposed to drop. So these are the default option is been already been selected. Now the next one is TCP timestamp. For example, if any packet has the TCP timestamp information enabled, then that packet is going to drop. For example, if someone has or attacker edited the timestamp into the TCP packet, it's supposed to get dropped. Now the next one is TCP fast open. So the packet is supposed to follow the method which is 3-way handshake, right? But if it is going to be follow method which is has to be open fast, then that is also going to be dropped. So these are the options you can select in the TCP drop. Now the next one is ICMP drop. So we are not going to select any of this option because this might going to cause any problem, but if you want to select this option because of the security reason, I would suggest to contact Palo Alto support to understand which are the options you should be selecting based upon your firewall monitoring. Now the next one is IPv6 drop. If you have like IP version 6 in your environment, then you should be choosing this option very carefully. Now the next one is ICMP version 6. For that is also you should be contacting Palo Alto support to understand which are the options you should be enabling so that you are not going to make any mistake, right? Now the last one is protocol protection. So this protocol protection basically applies when you have the layer 2 scenario. For example, if you have interface configured under the layer 2 type, or if you have vWire scenario, then only you should be selecting this option, like which protocol you want to include or exclude as per the layer 2 scenario. So let's have one example in here. For example, you want to exclude LLDP, right? Link layer discovery protocol. So if you want to exclude, then what will happen in exclude scenario? This is going to only exclude or deny, right? So it is only going to deny this particular protocol, but it is going to allow all of the other protocol which belongs to the layer 2. So you should not be using this option, because what will happen, it is only going to be denied this, but you do not know which are the protocol on the internet. They might also going to get allow if you select this option, right? So as per the Palo Alto, what you should be instead doing, you should be selecting include list. If you want to include list, what is going to happen, let's say you want to include some of the protocol which is workable in your environment. So for example, CDP, for example Cisco discovery protocol. This is one of the protocol you want to include. You want to include some other few protocols, so you can make the list of those protocol include in here. And then what will happen, this will be only allow all this protocol, and beside this protocol everything is going to get denied. So this would be the best practices, allowing the protocols you want to include and deny every other protocol. So that is something option we can achieve from in here. So we have configured all of our options in here. Now all we need to do is we need to select OK, right? So once this profile is configured, all we need to do is we need to apply this profile to the particular zone. Since we have created this profile particularly for the outside zone, so let's go to zone, into outside zone. Now in here we need to select that profile what we just created, which is outside zone protection. So once it is selected, we need to press OK and then press commit. So it is going to apply change on your Palo Alto firewall. So that is how you can configure zone protection profile on your Palo Alto firewall. But still I would suggest you to contact Palo Alto support if you do not know which option is best for you, so that they can assist you which are the options you should be enabling. So in this topic what we did, basically we tried to understand what zone protection is and how we can configure on Palo Alto firewall. So this is for now, and I will see you in the next section. See you.